Coming up on episode 81 of the Behind the Back podcast, the Sacramento Kings are coming off of a really bad streak. But Ben and I will talk about what we're seeing from this losing streak, but also address their most recent win while talking about this homestand that we will have to finish off the year. After that, we pivot over to San Francisco. Jordan Mason, he's gone. Kyle Juszczyk, he stayed. Then we're going to talk about the Brock Purdy contract and some other moves. Maybe if this is a Kyle Shanahan system conversation, what the ownership's like. We got a lot of news coming out of 49ers camp. And in the Eagles, there's just been a lot of movement. The Eagles have had a lot of guys come in. Don't know what the biggest impact they're going to have, but we talk about some notable signings and Brandon Graham retiring, addressing his final goodbyes. So with that being said, guys, let's get it. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I am Marcos Conan Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet. Reds, Ben, my brother. How are you?
You know, I'm a little under the weather today, but I'm starting to feel a little bit better. You know, Kings are coming off of a win, but we got a lot to talk about.
Yes, and just like we mentioned in the intro, it's one of very few wins that we've been able to acquire in this most recent stretch for the Sacramento Kings. They did beat the Memphis Grizzlies last night. That was a good game, high energy game. I think they came out and played pretty well. But before we talk about that game, I want to talk about just this most recent stretch, because coming out of the All-Star break, it seemed like this team was finding a rhythm. Their defense was really solid. Our point differential was awesome. Like, yes, I understand, like, not as great competition, but even then we were hanging with teams like Houston. So we kind of had some confidence going into this stretch. And we talked about it last pod being a really important stretch if we wanted to push at all in the standings and really try to make any kind of change in the play-in, let alone the playoff standings. So for now, our past 5 games are 1-4, and that includes last night's win. So what have you really taken away from our most recent struggles that stand out to you?
I mean, it's, you know, we're seeing a lot of our concerns kind of come true here with this team. This is, you know, obviously they've dealt with some injuries post All-Star break with Malik and Domas, and now more recently Domas again. We'll talk about that. But this team is kind of struggling to put all the pieces together. And the best way that I've, you know, been able to kind of, put a picture to it is you have all these great food items on one plate, but they don't all go together very well, right? And so you've got, you know, your pizzas and you've got, you know, some Chinese food on there, and you've got like a burrito or something, and all these things by themselves are awesome, but together you're like, this is kind of weird. I'm probably just going to take this entire burrito and I'm going to put all these other things in the fridge and save them for later. So this 5-game stretch, Marcos, Brendan Nunez just tweeted out a few minutes ago. I want to talk about this for a second. He said Sacramento over their last 5 games, they're 1-4. Their offensive rating is 22nd. Defensive rating is 28th. Their net rating is 29th. Points per game is at 22nd. Their field goal percentage is 12th, not bad. 3-point attempts is at 34%, which is you know, okay. 3-point percentage being made is 24th. And the opponent's point per games is 27th, opponent's field goal percentage 28th, and opponent's 3-point percentage is 30th. So this has been a stretch from HE double hockey stick, because we're within the first 5 minutes here. This is a tough stretch for this team, and they've got to really dig deep here in the next coming games with this homestand to really, you know, position themselves in a place where they want to be to finish the season.
Yeah, it's a tough spot. And honestly, like when we were watching last night's game against Memphis, they showed the difference between post All-Star break versus these past 4 games up to that point. And it looked like it had flipped entirely on its head. Like point differential in terms, just like you mentioned, everything was flipping. Our offense and defenses went away. There was never any real consistency. We looked clunky still. We had mentioned, you know, we have seen flashes of, you know, potentially why Zach LaVine shouldn't be a primary ball handler and distributor. But the problem is like you said, a lot of great pieces here, but there's nothing really there to make it all come together. And this is definitely the issue that we've been running into. And I do think that I don't really know if it's going to change. I really think that this team is one of those teams that plays well when everything's going right, when all the shots are falling, these guys will create for themselves and it goes in, and their defense, they're actually getting touches, deflections. Their defense was really solid last night. Like, I thought at times like they were really pesky, but that's not always the case. And when it's not like that, we really do fall off a cliff, like production wise. So I haven't really liked the inconsistencies, but that's always kind of been the defining factor for this team. It's been really frustrating.
Yeah, and one thing that, is pretty concerning at this point, when we were talking about De'Aaron Fox potentially being traded, we kind of discussed the potential downfall when you trade a player like that, right? And obviously the return for Fox initially was like, well, this isn't bad. Zach LaVine's a good player, and obviously we get Valanciunas, a little bit later in the trade deadline there, but the issue still remains the same. We don't have a true point guard now, and you're seeing that with Zach LaVine trying to be playmaker out there, and you're seeing that in these recent games, particularly in the last 4 or 3 games since Malik has been back. He's struggled to find his rhythm. Obviously, last night against Memphis, he did find his rhythm. He led all scorers with I think 28 points, and I think he had 6 or 8 assists in there as well. He had a really solid night, but when Malik isn't having a solid night, we don't have a playmaker, and that's forcing a guy like Zach LaVine, who is not the best playmaker, to try and playmake. And this is something that we need to watch this offseason, particularly if they want to run this core back or run a majority of this core back. You're still going to need a point guard, somebody who can run this offense, because this offense, the way it is right now, isn't working. So I don't know what you think about this point guard situation, but personally, I'm looking at it and I'm not happy with it. I'm not pleased.
Honestly, I thought I was more optimistic when this whole Fox trade happened. I was like, I want to see Monk get this primary ball handler responsibility, and it hasn't worked out the way I thought it was going to. I guess after the first few weeks, it almost felt like, again, Malik might have, he's a great sixth man in terms of his ability to feast on the second string opponents until, and then once he gets going, he can compete with anybody. But I do think, I don't know if Monk maybe feels the pressure, and I don't know if the stuff with Fox got to him, and then, his slight injury with his toe. I don't know how much of that has been lingering, but something, his mojo's just not the same. And I do think that there are times where he's forcing it a bit, but yesterday worked really well for him. So I was really happy, that he was able to kind of find his first good game back. So I hope that's something that's, he's able to keep going. And, this point guard situation's an issue, but it's one that I don't know how easily can be fixed in a way. I think at this point, you're going to hope that the team runs guys like Devin Carter a little bit more in hopes that maybe with more reps, he can eventually turn into that guy maybe next year, have a Keon-like jump next year and be a true contributor. But that's, there aren't many paths for this situation to be fixed outside of another trade itself. Because, again, I don't know what our free agency appeal looks like nowadays. So it's definitely going to be something to monitor for sure, but definitely has not worked out the way I've wanted to since the post-Fox trade.
So, Marcos, let's talk about these, I guess, next 6 games, because the next 6 games are on our home court. We're in the midst of a 7-game homestand. This is a crucial time in the season for this Kings team if they want to position themselves for a play-in chance, because the odds of us getting out of the play-in, at least on the upside of it, are pretty low at this point. So I think we can all agree 9th seems about right for this team. If I'm looking at the standings, the Kings are 4.5 games out of 6th, and
Okay.
they are, I guess, 3 games out of 11th, so falling entirely out of the play-in, right? So it sounds like, and even between 9 and 10, where the Mavericks are sitting, there's a 2-game gap. So we're pretty positioned where we're at. Obviously, with 15 games left in the season, anything can happen, right? Especially with the schedule that the Kings have got and the way they've been playing.
Yeah.
But let's talk about these next 5 games just for a second before we get into some questions that I have for you. These next 5 games obviously are super crucial, and essentially every game from here on out is a must-win. But you see in this next 5 games 2 back-to-backs. And we've got one of them starting tomorrow with Cleveland coming to our house. And then Thursday, the Bulls play us. Then we turn around and play the Bucks on Saturday. So a day break in there. Then you get a day break on Sunday and you play the Celtics on the first game of back-to-back before you play the Thunder the next night. So these 2 back-to-backs are horrendous. And on top of that, Domantas Sabonis, we're awaiting news right now to even see if he's going to be back this season. Because that injury last night didn't look good. It looked really bad. It's not often you see Domantas Sabonis sitting on the ground asking immediately for the trainers to come over and help him get to the locker room, not just the bench, but all the way to the locker room. And then on his way back to the locker room, kind of collapses under pain. So, Marcos, these next 5 games, what are you looking for this team? Is it something along the lines of consistency? Is it something along the lines of just get back to, the offensive firepower that we know you can? What are you looking for in this team?
Honestly, what I'm looking for, I don't know if we're going to be able to provide. This is a tough stretch, and I don't know if we have the collective juice. I think the only thing that would give us a real chance of this is everyone outside of Domas stays healthy. And then I know, Ben, you touched up on it, but for those who didn't know, Domantas so his injury was an ankle sprain, or he twisted his ankle. He obviously, if you watch the video, he twists his right ankle to the right. It looked really, really bad. And again, like he said, we're still waiting news, so we're trying to see what happens there. But without Domas, Jonas played really well in good spots, but then against the Warriors, he was unplayable, right? So it's going to be, I don't know, it's going to be a collective team effort. We need guys like Laravia to have a really big game. Trey Lyles, those guys are going to be more impactful than ever, I think. I find that the lineups where even if Trey is our small ball 5, I do find that those lineups are effective, at least on the defensive side. But if we play with that energy that we played with last night, we will be able to compete in a lot of these games. But I'm very, very nervous if we could steal this game against Cleveland, but this game might also just be the tone setter for the rest of this stretch, because we saw what happened when we got punched in the mouth before, and it was last week, and it was a little tough. And I don't know if Cleveland, if Cleveland comes out here and just puts one on us and we lose by 20, I don't really know how we're going to respond the rest of the way. Even with Chicago, coming in, I don't know if Kevin, if I've heard he's been in and out of the lineup, he was hurt recently, but if he comes home, it'll be exciting to see him play for the first time. So I'm excited to see him. But honestly, this team just needs to stay aggressive on the defensive end. That's really the only way they're going to win games. I think their offense is weird in that it really is fueled by their defense, just kind of like how it was last year. They really looked at their best when they were able to create havoc, create turnovers, and just get out and run. We can score in the half court, but that's when we start relying on that. That's how we kind of know the game's not going at the pace we want it to. So I really am looking for these guys to just play aggressive and play together. Hopefully that's enough to win at least 2 or 3 of these games against some of the big ones.
Yeah, you made a really good point that kind of reminded me of something that I noticed last night in that Memphis game, and that was there was brought up at one point, I believe by Mark Jones, that the Grizzlies lead the league in terms of shooting as early as they do in the shot clock. So they get a shot up quicker than any other team in the league. And if you look at their standings, they're up there. They're a lock for the playoffs. So they're doing stuff right. So last night, what I'm seeing is the Kings not really forcing the Memphis Grizzlies out of their play style, but the Kings kind of matched that play style, and they were getting up shots quick. And obviously the Kings found a way to get a win. They had 35 some assists, and shot 20 of 41 from 3. So we saw a lot of success in a fast-paced offense last night. That's something that I'm looking for in these coming up games. Is I want to see them get into their offense quick. And I'm not so much looking and focusing on the defensive end, because call it what you want, I've essentially given up hope on the defensive end of the floor with this team. At this point, when I look around the room at all these offensive weapons, it's mind-boggling to me that you're not averaging over 125 points a game. And I think a majority of that, yes, is something to do with new players, adding in new players. Obviously, with the injuries, you haven't had consistent, lineups on the floor running together, right? But nonetheless, you still have shot makers out there, and you still have creators out there, guys who can create for their own shot and get theirs. And when they're doing it properly and they're running the right schemes, they're finding ways to dominate the teams that they should be dominating. And so now I'm looking at this stretch where we're playing essentially all playoff teams, and I'm asking and begging the Kings to find your offense, find your offensive power, find that momentum, whatever it is that this team needs to do to really lock in on the offensive side. And for the last 2 years, we've both been asking this team to buy in on the defensive end. But with this roster, to me, it doesn't make sense to continue to just, bash your head against the wall. I get they've found ways to find some success on the defensive end, prior to these last 5 games. But I'm really just looking at the offensive end.
No, I think you make a really great point. I do think if we buy into our strengths, which was the whole reason we brought in DeMar in the first place, was to really just be aggressive on offense and to really buy into that side of the ball. And I do think that we are at our best, unfortunately, like most teams are when get the ball out, when you move the ball around, when there's just a lot of movement. And there are plenty of times in our ISO offense where we're a standstill and guys don't really know which way to cut. But then I'm also watching the Grizzlies go at ISO and guys are cutting following the guy too. I'm like, man, there are some teams that have like missing elements to that I could see that our offense could adopt in some way. But I don't know if that's something that Doug really even, focuses on, and if these guys are really what the system is anymore now that these guys are constantly seeing changes. I am curious to see, like we said, once we find out more on the Domas news, how serious it is, it will really, I don't know if it'll define the rest of our season, but to not have him potentially for the play-in would be very detrimental to our chances if we want to advance. But I do think, listen, this is as good of a stretch as any to really go up against the highest level of competition and see if there's something that you can build off of during the stretch. So I am excited for the challenge. I just don't know how many of these games I'm going to be excited to see midway through them. So we'll see what happens.
So I'm going to say out of these next, we just talked about the 5 games, but it's a 6-game remainder for the home stretch. I'm going to say out of these 6 games, I really don't even feel good about it, but I think 3-3 sounds about right for this team. I think you probably find a win against the Bulls. I think the Cavs is going to be a hard one tomorrow. If you can find a win there, obviously the Cavs coming off of a tough loss against, who was that? It'll come to me because they were talking garbage the whole game. Orlando. And they're coming off a tough game against Orlando. If you can find a win against the Cavs and start this stretch off right, this is going to be huge. And obviously you can say the Kings started off right against Grizzlies. I get that. That's cool. Let's see you, continue to carry that on because you just snapped a 4-game skid. So I'm thinking that Cleveland game is going to be tough. I'm thinking the Bulls is going to be a game that you can absolutely get. I think you can find a way to beat the Bucks, but it's going to be hard because of their size. So, right there, at best, you're maybe 2-1 because I don't think you win both the games against Cleveland and Milwaukee.
Right.
The Celtics and the Thunder is a back-to-back, and obviously, there's a back-to-back with the Bucks and the Bulls. So I'm really thinking in that stretch, the Kings are going to be around 2 wins, 1 or 2 wins.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Blazers will cap off the home stretch with the W. I'm hoping. And so I'm feeling 3 wins probably sounds about right. What do you think?
No, I would, at our best, even at our best, I think we would probably only really pull off 4-2. So I think 3-3 is about right, at least in terms of if this team is what we think, if this team is what we want it to be and maybe have a shot in the play-in, then we'd like to see them go 3-3 against some pretty solid competition. So listen, even a game like Portland still has a lot to fight for. They're one of these teams that are clawing their way up the standings too. They're right behind Phoenix, so we can't count them out fully either. So they'll have something to play for by the time they face us, and that would be a tough matchup anyway. They usually play us really well. So this is gonna be a good stretch. I think we can go 3-3 at the worst, and hopefully I have a good feeling about the Cleveland game. I do think that, like, coming off of last night, I do think that if you're going to steal a game against any one of these top teams, that I do think Cleveland might be the best one for you. We usually do play Cleveland well, and I do think we do have the size to compete with them. I know losing Domas sucks for this one, but I like seeing the matchup with like Keegan on Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell on Keon. Like that's going to be a lot of fun to see. So the Cleveland game, I'm really excited for, but I do think that it's going to be tough, but it's going to be a tough stretch. And honestly, I don't know. I want to talk about like the I think now we can kind of pivot over the standings of it all. I know we kind of talked about this a couple times, like what's a successful season? Like, what do we think here? I guess we can do another check-in on how we potentially feel. Like, do you view getting into the play-in and maybe even, let's say, even winning one game, like a success? Do we have to make it out of the play-in to be successful? Like, given everything that this team's kind of been through the past, I would say 2 months, like, what do you really think, the expectations around this team are?
Yeah, I personally would consider making the play-in. So making the play-in, winning the play-in, and getting into the playoffs are a couple different things. Making the play-in won't be a W to me. I think you're already, and you've been fighting for that play-in position for this entire time. It's not like you've been out for it's not like you've been in 12th place is what I'm trying to say and fighting just to get to a play-in chance. No, you've been middle of the pack the entire season. So the expectation at this point is that you are a play-in team. So making the play-in, personally, not a W, not exciting, not fun. Getting out of the play-in has its appeals. Ultimately, you're like, okay, you made the playoffs. Your matchup's the Thunder. and we could be getting, that early, look at that matchup here in the coming, games when we match up against the Thunder. And I don't think it's going to go too hot. But I'm expecting the Kings to get rolled in that playoff series. I would actually be surprised if they won one game. Just with how much recently they've struggled against these teams above 500. And so I'm concerned in that regard. And personally, I don't consider that a win. Just making it to the playoffs to get rolled by X, Y, or Z team, that doesn't move the needle for me. And at that point, you're, you sure you have things to build off of, but then it begs another question of do you trust this front office to make the right moves to position this team, moving forward and really, I guess, essentially save hope in Sacramento for years to come. And this is, I'm going to hand this off to you. If I were to ask you that question, if let's say we get rolled in the playoffs, let's say best case scenario, we make the playoffs. Okay. We get one win, one awesome win against the Thunder. Let's go, man. Now we're in off-season mode. Marcos, do you trust the ownership group and this front office to essentially save hope in Sacramento for the years to come?
That's such a great question. I want to say that I would be more prepared to answer this question, but I thought I knew. I thought I would. If you asked me at the beginning of the season before everything started, I would have been like, yeah, absolutely. Like they've been on a heater. They've been doing really well. Vivek's seemingly out of it. Like this is great. And now it's I don't know who's going to be the one making the decisions in the offseason. And I don't really know. Apparently Jeremy Lamb's been running our team off the sideline. So I don't really know like what is, if they have the ability to make it work. Monty has made good moves. So I do think if Monty really is the one, allowed to call these shots a little bit, I think that we would stand a good enough chance. But if there's just all these hands in the pot, I am really worried about what the idea of what the owners want this team to look like is all just going to be jumbled up and different versus just one identity that we're all hunting for. So it does worry me. So I didn't really answer. I want to say, I don't want to say no, but I don't want to say yes, but I really don't know. This is a tough question. I don't know about you.
I'm going to be outright and honest. I don't trust this ownership group, and I'm leaving it at the ownership group because of what we've heard of recent with the essentially the lack of trust with Monty and Wes Wilcox. So this is concerning because we've seen this trend before with this owner, with Vivek, where when the team is starting to essentially go in a direction he doesn't feel is, in a winning way, he puts his hand back into the pot and, tries to make moves that are against what his general manager wants to do. And this is where things get really messy when your ownership group isn't on the same page as your general manager, and your general manager isn't on the same page as your head coach. Like, this is the same routine, the same chain that we've seen the Sacramento Kings fall into for a number of years now, and essentially why they were out of the playoffs for as long as they were. So the way things are going right now, no, I don't trust this ownership group and this front office to make the proper moves to save Sacramento and the future of Sacramento for the years to come. And it's a frustrating place to be, but it's the honest truth for me.
Yeah, and I wonder, how much of this is the team really, you know, I don't know how to I don't know how to describe this, because we watch a team like the Mavs, right? And to just hear how open, the Mavs GM was about the whole Luka Doncic trade of it all, and now like the outcome that they're in, to the point where they can't even field enough, have enough players on the court to play games. Like, it's a crazy, world to live in, when he thought that trade was going down, that it was going to be a totally different result. Like, oh, AD was going to play, Kyrie's going to be healthy. Like, oh, this team has some juice. They'll be compete for the plan, and it won't look as bad when they see my vision. And for the Kings, like, we're making the same kind of moves that teams that are dysfunctional and don't operate correctly like make consistently all the time. And like, even the Fox move and the way the whole Fox situation was handled is just like, a well-run organization does not do that and doesn't operate that way. So it is really frustrating that, like, to your point, it is hard to trust this team to really this ownership group to make all these right decisions when they've just given us this track record of messing things up when things are going in a positive direction, and they just don't want to be patient enough to let it happen. So we're in a tough spot, and I don't really know what that means, but we're gonna have plenty of time to talk about it in the offseason, in terms of but I honestly think at the same time, if we do get rolled by OKC, me personally, I'd be happy that throughout all this nonsense, we still somehow made it to the playoffs. I kind of feel like the fact that we kind of already know we're going to get rolled, if that is our destiny, then hell, let's just get to the playoffs and then, see what happens and hope for the best.
Fair.
But I mean, but in my head, would it be successful? No. So I do understand your side of things there.
That's totally fair. So, the other thing to keep in mind is this isn't, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, this isn't an appealing destination right now for free agents, and even for guys who are already on your team. I mean, you've seen some of the body language around guys out there right now. Last night it was noted by Matt George. He was at the game, and he saw at one point during a huddle, I'm not sure if you saw this, Marcos, but Trey Lyles and DeMar DeRozan kind of got into like a heated discussion at one point or another. And I'm not reading into that any way, shape, or form. I mean, this is a basketball game. We're competing. We got to figure something out. I'm going to have heated conversations with my guys. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not tripping about that. But it's something to keep in mind for a guy like DeMar DeRozan, who's on the backside of his career, who's on the backside of the hill, who wants to compete for championships. He was talking about competing and contending for a championship when he got here to Sacramento, and we're contending for the bottom tier of a play-in tournament. So is he going to want to stick around? I doubt it. Who knows? But then you've got a guy like Domantas Sabonis, who is questioning his future in Sacramento, because it was recently reported that he wants to, essentially find out from the organization and get a little bit of enlightenment in terms of what the direction of the franchise is. And when you hear something like that, it typically means, is there a reason that I should be sticking around here and investing my future here in Sacramento? Or are you guys going to continue doing this kind of dysfunctional, running of the organization? Because if that's the case, I'm probably going to bounce. And one of the things that came up recently, Domas was asked about, his return to the team post-injury, prior to his injury, and the impact of Valanciunas. And he offered some good answers on those, but he was asked about the inconsistent play of Sacramento of late, and why he thinks this is happening. His answer was interesting, Marcos. He said, new guys, I don't even know. I can't tell you because we would be figuring it out. My question to you is, is Domas's answer alarming, considering all season long when these guys were asked tough questions, because it has happened all season long, even going back to De'Aaron Fox, when they were asked these questions, they all had a general answer that seemed to be on a, same page basis. This one doesn't sound like it's on any page. It sounds like, and obviously you're asking a player to answer what is really a coach's, answer. But if you knew what was going on as a coach, or you knew what was going on as a team, you'd probably be able to shed a little bit of light into what's going on. Domas saying he doesn't even know and he can't tell you because they would have been figuring it out by now, I think it's alarming. What do you think?
For me, it's hard for me to read into it, just in the sense of this guy, Domas recently has been gone for the past, week too. So like you come off the All-Star break, things are starting to gel. Okay, you get hurt. Then they start having success without him for a little bit, and now they have this losing streak, and now he's entering in the middle of this losing streak when they're still trying to figure things out. And then so whatever rhythm Zach LaVine had just, gotten by with this rotation of guys, it gets disrupted again. Malik gets back into the fold. Like, I do think that Domas's answer made sense, in the sense of, would it be, is it like that, this is a lot of inconsistency around here. And it isn't that shocking to find him, feeling that way. But at the same time, you're right. In the past, we have had guys who, we're all kind of on the same page, and the message is the same around here, and we kind of all have that trust in each other. Now it's more like we're just kind of this group of guys who have not really spent that much time together, and are trying to figure out tough problems, with on the fly, and it's really tough. And it's not even just the players, it's the coach too. Like this, this whole team has just kind of been jumbled together this year. And post trade deadline, this has just been the group of guys, and we're like, okay, we've only really hung out for a month. This is like a really tough spot to be in. So I think it's not that, for me, it doesn't feel so much alarming given everything that's happened this season. So that's just kind of how I feel about that one.
And I would fully agree if it wasn't with the last, 15 games of the season. The fact you don't have like a same page basis and not everybody's on the same page with 15 games remaining and you're fighting for, a play-in spot and wanting to go to the playoffs, that's the part of it that's alarming. I guess it's more of like a timing thing for me.
No, that's totally fair. And yeah, and that's where, I do think, like, yeah, right. At this point of the season, you really hoped that even if Domas was out, that because we saw him at the games with these guys, that like, you'd have a little bit more rapport. And you can already tell we're getting to that stage where DeMar is kind of crashing out a little bit here. And his future is, up in the air. I don't think that, he doesn't have any more time to waste as a player. If his goal is to win a title here and we can't deliver, I don't think it's entirely unfair of him to go say, hey, I tried with you guys. I gave you guys a chance. It didn't work out. Please, help me out here. Send me somewhere where I can win. So that's not entirely off the table given the way that this season has gone. So I think you're right. Tensions are starting to reach their boiling point. And I also think that they're very aware of who they have to play down this next 6 games too. And they're like, this is going to be kind of a nightmare if we don't pull together. And this could also just be a cliff for the rest of the season to just signal these guys like, hey, let's just end it now, so then we can just get out of here and, take a breather.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm concerned about. I don't want to question how much these guys are bought in, because these guys are bought in. I mean, everyone has been bought in all season long, with the exception to De'Aaron Fox. This team wanted to all season long, obviously compete, and the goal wasn't to get a draft pick. The goal wasn't to to try and just get through this year so that you can build for next year. No, the goal was to win now. I mean, look at the trade that the return that you got for De'Aaron Fox. That was a win now return. You didn't go and get Stephon Castle. You didn't go and get a building block for the next 8 years. You got a win now piece. So guys bought into that. When we saw this team go on a few win streaks this year on top of their losing streaks, where they really, it's not something you do when you're just trying to be a middle of the pack team. This team all season long has been bought into competing on a night-to-night basis. And I think, ultimately we got to show so much respect to Doug Christie for being able to take over with the state of the Sacramento Kings team to take over and to get them all to buy in the way that he has. And you got to also credit him to, get this team through all the injuries, troubles that they've had of late. Like, this is a lot for a guy who's never seen a head coaching position. And I think he's done an exceptional job. The question remains, at the end of the season, if they offer him that head coaching, job, and we'll talk about that when that time comes. But, the question has never been for me if this team was bought in. But the question remains of if this team is able, when they're bought in, able to actually compete on a level that, we expect them to and we want to expect them to. Because we're seeing a lot of red flags, in this. Obviously, the last game against Memphis was a great win. It felt really good. But that doesn't take away from your 4-game losing streak where you should have had a couple of those. And at the very least, you should have kept those games closer than they were. Getting blown out, 3 of those 4 games, you could argue 4 games, it doesn't feel good. And it's not good for morale, not just with the fan base, but it's not good for morale in the locker room. So it's going to be a tough stretch, Marcos, and we're going to be there every step of the way because we love this team. And we're going to see kind of how this team's able to pull it together. I'm hoping that they can surprise us. Let's see a 15-game winning streak to end the season. That would be incredible. But man, this is going to be a hell of a stretch, and I think this is where you're going to see this team either jump the cliff or take a few steps back and start climbing a ladder again.
Yeah, and really the name of the game for this Sacramento Kings team is execution. They just need to execute, and we see what happens when when they're at their best and when they're executing, and hopefully they can carry that into this final homestand. But like Ben said, we are going to go. We're going to talk about it once it happens, and hopefully we're talking about a successful homestand where at least we're not getting blown out, we're competing, and hopefully it comes away with some wins. So with that, we will pivot on over to talk some football. We're going to talk some big news, some fun stuff happening around San Francisco 49ers, and a lot of movement happening in the Eagles camp. So we'll definitely bring that up. So we will be right back. All right, we are back to talk some San Francisco 49ers. So, Ben, we've had some interesting news coming from the 49ers camp. I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad, but where do you want to start? Do you want to start with the legend, the man, the myth returning, Kyle Juszczyk, huh? What do you think?
Let's talk about Juszczyk for a minute. So he's back. He's back with the 49ers after 8 seasons. There was a little bit of uncertainty there for a minute, and then obviously with his departure being released, we were like, wow, this is the end of an era here in San Francisco. And then, a few days later, wake up Saturday morning and find out that Kyle Juszczyk is signed here once again with the 49ers. So he's going for that 10-year run here in San Fran. But Marcos, it's a little bit confusing to me. And I'm going to break it down for you why I feel that way. But ultimately, I'm excited that Juszczyk is back. I love Juszczyk. I think he's an awesome piece of this organization. I think he's a really great piece in the locker room in terms of a leadership standpoint and somebody that you can really lean on in those good times and bad times. But when I look at what this team has done in terms of moves, obviously the guys that they have signed, I mean, Marcos, we're going to be the best special teams unit in the league. I can tell you that right now. This team is fully bought in on the special teams. This is they're assembling probably the Captain America Avengers style of special teams units right now.
I love that.
But one of the first additions that the 49ers made was signing a tight end who was excelled in pass blocking. And when they made that signing, I was like, oh, okay, this is a really good signing. This means that, they're probably going to do less fullback sets and they're probably going to do more tight end, double tight end sets where you have a blocker and you have George Kittle who's able to actually go and run a route and, might actually see some more air yards. But now you re-sign your fullback and you bring him back here. And obviously, when you texted me and asked me how I felt about Juszczyk being released, I told you it's kind of crazy because he was essential to a lot of the run scheme that the 49ers had for so many years. Now with bringing him back, I wonder if Kyle Shanahan is going to be bought into, actually throwing the ball as much as we want him to, or if he's going to continue running his same schematic of pound the rock on the ground and you're not going to see these double tight end sets. So I'm not sure what it looks like from an outside perspective, and I'll get your opinion on that here. But it's interesting. I'm excited, but it's interesting.
Yeah, no, Juice, I know we have talked about it a lot, via text. I was like, honestly, I feel like Kyle used to use him so much more back when, this team was a little bit more put together, and maybe it was the injuries last year. Maybe that's something that, I feel like it's easy to overlook now that the season's over. The injury troubles you guys had were really bad, and you guys had to use all your stars in kind of different ways, and it was definitely one of those things where I think, like you mentioned, Juice is going to be great for the locker room. He's always just been a guy who has been here throughout this run, and I think he's crucial. You always like to keep those locker room presence guys, but at the same time, this is interesting how you guys talk about, wanting to allocate resources in different areas and get younger in certain spots. And I guess, it's not like you needed a young fullback to make everything right. So, maybe that's the position where you can say, hey, we can give it to this veteran guy who we can still potentially scheme things up for if Shanny feels comfortable kind of going back to that. Like you mentioned, if he's going to really lean into what he's more comfortable with this upcoming season, thinking that he will have kind of the roster, the personnel to do so. So I know that it just feels weird because given a lot of the other moves that they made, it kind of seemed like, this one wouldn't have been, yeah, it would have been sad because he's been here for so long, but it also would have made sense. So, good that he's back, but, interesting.
Yeah, and I'm going to be curious to see if Kyle Shanahan switches anything up from a schematic standpoint, because that was one of the things that you and I talked about all last year, was if Kyle Shanahan needs to switch something up and needs to put trust elsewhere, outside of the run game. And obviously, we're going to talk about the running back room here in a minute, but this begs the question of how much do you trust your quarterback? And obviously, yes, they do throw the football, but when you start to lean back towards, your heavy run offense, it begs the question of, how much do you trust your quarterback? And at that point, how much do you want to pay your quarterback? What does that number look like? All these things kind of tie into each other, right? So lots of conversations to come on that. But Marcos, recently, the San Francisco 49ers traded Jordan Mason, our running back one, for a majority of last season with Christian McCaffrey out before Kyle Shanahan put him in the doghouse again. They traded him to the Minnesota Vikings. The question around San Francisco right now, is there a reason to be concerned with the running back room in the 49ers, and specifically with the depth in the 49ers running back room? Because you've got an older Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, you've got Garendo here for some years now, but you don't have Jordan Mason, and that this is something you got to kind of keep an eye on, especially with Christian McCaffrey coming off of the Achilles concerns that he's had here, and with all his injury history, it begs the question: are you going to have him all season long? And at that point, who is the guy that you're going to be able to lean on? So I'm going to kind of address that, and then I'm going to hand it off to you and get your point of view here. I'm not concerned. And the reason being is we have a ton of draft picks this year. I don't expect the 49ers to draft a running back with pick 11. I actually don't expect the 49ers to have pick 11 if I think things are going to go the way that they do. But I do fully expect the 49ers to draft a running back. And the other thing that I'm not concerned with is, yes, Jordan Mason's out, and Jordan Mason is an awesome running back. He's someone that you can rely on. He shoots the gaps. He's essentially, I made the comparison last season, a baby Marshawn Lynch. But a lot of the success you find with running backs in San Francisco is stemmed from the system that Kyle Shanahan runs. It's a plug and play running back system. And that's the biggest reason I'm not concerned with the loss of Jordan Mason. And I'm not concerned if, Christian McCaffrey does go down once again for this season. I would still feel like we can lean on our run game to get us, in a winning position. So what does it look like from an outside perspective?
No, I think that's exactly it. I do think, I understand he was, last year he was kind of a fan favorite when he was producing and playing really well, but he was also injury prone as well. He was struggling with injuries on his own right. But these are the kind of moves you have to make. I think he was entering the final year of his deal anyway. So let's say he does well anyway, then you're entering this conversation of like, oh, do we have to pay him now? And that's just normally not how it works in the running back market. So, it's good I think it was great for both parties. Minnesota ends up with a good, backup back. They brought back Aaron Jones too. So like it made sense for them to kind of go all in on that when they have the offensive line and they have the weapons around them to put a running back two for Jordan Mason. So like that made sense for them. But for the Niners, I know you guys, some fans loved him, but it was kind of the best move to make in the long term. And like you said, it's a nice running back draft. You can replace running back pretty well. Like Kyle Shanahan is that kind of running back guru with the way his scheme is. And there's always been the talk, some teams have position coaches that are very well renowned. For like Philadelphia, it's like the offensive line coach. For the Niners, it has been Kyle Shanahan and their running backs coach. They've had a really good connection of being able to find kind of diamonds in the rough at that position. So I do, if there's one position you can trust the Niners that they kind of have an idea what they're doing, that definitely is the running back position. So yeah, I was, I'm happy for Jordan. Bummer to see him go, but this was a good move for both parties, I think.
I wonder how reckless it would be for the 49ers to trade up and get Ashton Gentry. I don't expect it to happen, but I don't know that I would be mad at it, especially if you were able to still build your offensive line throughout the draft, or, and address some of the other positions. I don't know that I would be crazy mad, especially with Christian McCaffrey on the backside.
Yeah, would it be irresponsible? Maybe, but at the same time, it's like this year also, you might want to just get that star in the building, right? Like if the Niners did the research on this guy and they really like him, maybe the Niners are kind of in a best player available situation where like, hey, we do have quite a bit of holes we need to fill, so might as well just grab a star here and then still focus on filling, where we can. So I don't, the irresponsible version of me really wants that to happen. That would be really cool. I do think, him and CMC would do wonders for each other early on before Gentry just kind of takes over. And I think that would be really helpful. So it would be very cool to see.
I think it's more likely that the Niners find a way to either trade up or trade back to get like a guy like Cam Skatibo. I think that would fit their play style pretty well. And it's not as reckless because you can find him in the later picks.
Exactly.
But it's going to be something to monitor for sure. I'm not concerned, but I'm curious. I'm curious to see how this organization handles this hole, because losing a guy like Jordan Mason, it is a hole, right? And he did such an exceptional job last season stepping into the role of running back one from week 1 till essentially like week, I want to say it was 9 or 10. He did a really great job, and he was a monster throughout the season. And so he's going to have some success in Minnesota. Minnesota is building a pretty nice team right now as well. But all of this really does rely on, how much you build that offensive line. And that should still be the number one goal for the 49ers this offseason, is building that offensive line. Obviously, initially you have concerns because you see all these offensive linemen going to other teams that, you wanted to circle and call them your number one, candidates for free agency signings. But the Niners are a tight pocketbook right now. They really don't want to spend money where they don't believe money is due. And so it's going to be interesting, especially with all these draft picks and the remainder of the season here, remainder of the offseason, to see how this team is able to build. But my last thing that I want to talk about here is the looming Brock Purdy contract.
Mm-hmm.
So Marcos, last week, Josh Allen signed a really nice deal, in my opinion. A really generous deal. He signed a 6-year, $330 million contract with the Buffalo Bills with an average salary of $55 million a year and $56 due for signing bonus. My question is, where do you think, and I have this top 10 quarterback in terms of how much they're getting paid. I have the top 10 paid quarterbacks in the league up right now. Do you think Brock Purdy and his contract falls in the top 10, especially with Jalen Hurts as number 10, making $51 million a year? Or do you think it's going to be lower? I have my number and what I believe it is, but we've kind of talked about this a couple times. And it's hard to gauge because the 49ers right now are making so many money moves. They expect to pay Brock Purdy. The expectation is that they do that this offseason still.
Mhm.
Do you think he falls in that top 10 making 51 million a year, plus, or do you think it's maybe just outside of that?
So, when we look at some of the dudes in his range, so we're saying, the top of that line would probably be Josh Allen at 55. I think Trevor Lawrence has that contract at 55 as well. And then I think it's, Tua,
Jordan Love and
Jordan
Joe
Love.
Burrow have 55 a year as well.
Okay, so I forgot Jordan Love got 55. So yeah, that's tough, right? So okay,
Right.
so you look at those guys in the 55, but I do look at the guys in like Tua's spot. I think Jared Goff, wasn't he like 54 or something like that? I don't know if he's on that top 10 list.
53. Yeah.
53. So even then, like at 53, like Jared Goff, Tua, I think if you can make that argument, like Jared Goff has now with the Lions had a lot of success. And I think that is a very comparable quarterback in the world of he can sling it, but he also does, with the pieces that he has around him and an awesome coach like calling the plays, how awesome he looked. And he might have been a product of the system around him as well. I do think that's a fair comp. If I'm Purdy, I could also say, hey, I'm better than freaking Trevor Lawrence, dude. Like, give me $55 million. So it's like you can operate with that and say yes. And you could also make that argument if you want to reach for the Dak Prescott contract, because what success has Dak Prescott had in the playoffs at all that Brock Purdy has not in just as short amount of time. So that's why this quarterback game is tough, because every quarterback could command the top of the market money. But then again, you alluded to it, a guy like Josh Allen, he could have easily said, you could pay me 65 million because I really am that kind of guy. But for him to take 55 million and leave some money on the table to build, that is an important element of it too. And I do think with guys like Jalen, we're going to see his contract come up pretty soon. And I think they're going to raise that annual salary. But obviously, you can raise a quarterback salary, but use it in void years to make it seem like, yes, it says $53 million a year, it says $55 million a year here, but in terms of what it's going to count towards the cap, it really isn't going to. You're not going to feel that impact if you do it correctly. So I do think that if we're talking about Brock Purdy's range, I would put him at Jared Goff. I'd put him at 53 million. That's what I would do.
Yeah, and you made a really great point that is a lot of what I'm going off of, and that's, comparing yourself to others up there, right? And, if you were to just solo out Brock Purdy's play and not make any comparisons, I would probably say he's worth about 45 million to, 48, maybe top end being 50. But then you have to really start looking at, well, what has he done? In his rookie contract, he made 2 NFC championships and made it to a Super Bowl. And you could argue that he was the better quarterback, just didn't complete a couple plays. And that right there is enough of a reason to pay a guy upwards of the 50 million in the top end of things. If I'm going to go 1 through 10 here and tell you the guys who have the Super Bowl experience and who don't. So Dak Prescott, no. Joe Burrow, yes, he's played in the Super Bowl. Josh Allen, AFC Championship. That's it. That's as far as he got. Jordan Love, no. Trevor Lawrence, no. Tua, no. Jared Goff, NFC Championship, no. Justin Herbert, no. Lamar Jackson, AFC. Jalen Hurts, Super Bowl, win. Super Bowl, win. That's the only guy in the top 10 who has a Super Bowl win, let alone Super Bowl experience, along with Joe Burrow. So right there, you have this argument of saying, well, if I'm Brock Purdy, I have this argument of saying, look, man, I was a major role in why you made 2 NFC championships and made it to a Super Bowl. And in that Super Bowl, I played my ass off and played very well. What you're paying for isn't just my skills on the field, but you're paying for the experience that I already have at the biggest stages. And this is something that I think a lot of people overlook so often, is the experience that's had when you're making, an offer to a player. Like, these teams have to take this into account. I wouldn't pay a guy like Justin Herbert $52 million just because he has an arm. I'm banking on him getting some getting some serious reps in some serious football games outside of just the first round of a playoffs, right? And so then I'm looking at these contracts like a Tua contract of $53 million a year. And I'm like, dude, that's overpay as heck, right? And you can argue the same for a guy like Trevor Lawrence or Jordan Love. What's Jordan Love done in this league, right? So just with all those guys being in the top 10, with so many questions of, well, what has this guy done? I'm at this point saying Brock's contract is probably going to be somewhere in the 55 million range, because that's what the market is going to demand from a player who has this kind of experience. And I think that's a lot of the reason why you see the 49ers go through this max exodus right now, is because I think the 49ers, you're seeing them expect to have to pay Brock in the $50 million range. And this is something that we're going to have to kind of keep an eye on as this, offseason progresses, because at this point, guys, don't be surprised if the first things you're hearing is Brock getting a contract around 53, 55 million. This, at the very least, he should be comparing himself to a guy like Tua, because Tua has done really nothing as a quarterback in the league. He's a good quarterback, but he's making top end money because that's what this market demands. And because you set that market at where it's at, and you got a guy up there in Dak Prescott making $60 million a year, you're going to have negotiations starting off in the top 10 every single time.
Exactly. And that's what you got to look at a guy like Jalen Hurts, right? At the time that he signed his deal, he was the number one dude for like 3 days until Joe Burrow took over, right? That's always how it is in the NFL. It's something that's literally happening right now. And we're watching it on like, I believe it's on the defensive side of the ball. And like with the cornerbacks and defensive tackles, like guys are resetting the market now, but you're signing your studs now. So 4 years down the line, they're a 10th place contract like Jalen Hurts is. And then you get the benefit of, oh, we won a Super Bowl, we made it work, and we were still able to pay a guy. That's how you're able to pay Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith.
Right.
All these guys all at once, you pay them early enough to where when your cap goes up, the market changes, these guys are still here. So it's the people and then you watch the Bengals pay T. Higgins and Jamar Chase at the same time. They, over the span of their contracts, if you compare them to AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, the Bengals will owe them $100 million more. So and they could have paid T. Higgins 2 years ago, and they could have paid Jamar last offseason for way cheaper. But this is what you do when you wait. So for Purdy, if he signs in 53 to 55, that's a steal. That's a great spot. You're not getting. I think for a guy with his experience, that's not asking a lot. If you're throwing the names up there, it's hard to argue. Like I think the casual fans would say, oh, Brock Purdy doesn't do much. He needs the guys. And he's going to be in a better situation this year. At least, the hope is going to be that. So in the sense of, yes, his pieces are gone, but he's going to be healthy. Other guys are going to be healthy. It's kind of a changing of the guard here. And then you get the luxury of, it's my contract. I'm here. Like, I get to run this team and really just do what I do best. And listen, if they give him the Jalen Hurts treatment and lean into the run game a little bit more, I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing for that offense, especially when it comes down to just getting into the playoffs and then unleashing the best version of yourself when you get there. So that's how I feel about that.
No, you nailed that on the head. I would feel the same. If you lean into the run game the way you do, similar to what the Eagles have done. And then, when you get to the playoffs, everyone expects you to continue leaning on the run game. And when they shut it down, your quarterback just unleashes hell, because all season long, he's listened to the critics, and he's bottled all this up. But a guy like Jalen Hurts keeping it as cool as he does, and a guy like Brock Purdy being the exact same, keeping it as cool as he does, and just unleashing what he's capable of doing when it matters most. Like, this is what you're paying for. So this is going to be an interesting, topic that we're going to keep rehashing and talking about throughout this season as this progresses. But I wanted to, I say get out in front of it, but I wanted to talk about it now, and kind of get it out, because there's a lot of possibilities out there. But in the loom of all these mass exodus, a large reason why this is happening is due to the fact you're going to have to pay Brock Purdy as much money as you do. And this is why you're seeing all these players leaving, and you're not seeing the 49ers extending, X amount of money to keep them here like they were in previous seasons. I hate Micah Parsons, but he kind of nailed it with his tweet when he was like, this is, what happens when you don't have a rookie quarterback no more. Like, when you gotta get out of that rookie deal, life hits you. You know, all this money hits you in the face. And this is the reality of football. This is the reality of team building. And a team like Philadelphia, you know, have done so well with Howie and the way that they have operated in terms of getting ahead of the market as consistently as they do. Like you just alluded to, like they have really set a lot of the tone and the blueprint of how to build your team properly. You know, if from talk about the trenches, you talk about the running back room, whatever you want, but the fact that you're paying guys ahead of when they're scheduled to be paid and jumping ahead of that market, anticipating guys like a Jamar Chase and a T. Higgins to get insane contracts and a Brandon Ayuk the season before. Like this was anticipated that this market was going to continue to go up and up and up and up. And like, yeah, Jalen Hurts is on the horizon. Like that's a contract you guys are going to have to eat. And now with him having won a Super Bowl, that money is probably going to be top end unless he agrees to taking a pay cut, which with a guy like Jalen Hurts, I think he's gotten his generational wealth, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if he's like, I'm just committed to legacy building at this point. Like I want to have as deep of a legacy and a trophy cabinet in my, you know, my $1 million mansions for the rest of my life. So
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on, but I wanted to have this conversation with you ultimately because this is going to be a major talking point for the Niners all off season long.
I do think if I can offer any, if I can offer Niners fans any sort of solace, I think when you look at kind of where the Eagles and the Niners have differed in the past few years is just the fact that the Eagles were fortunate enough to be hitting in these past few drafts. You know, when you hit multiple drafts in a row, all of a sudden you end up with, 7 starters, 5 out of your 11 starters on the field at any given time on a rookie deal, and they're outperforming their contract, right? And the Niners, I was listening to a Niners podcast, I forget which one it was, but they had mentioned that in the past 3 years, you've only gotten 2 or 3 quality starters versus last year alone where you guys ended up with 4. But like from 2021 to 2023, you guys only really had 3 starters come from that. So I think that when it comes time to paying players and then you're put in this spot, when you don't have all these young guys, outperforming their deals, it does make it a little bit tougher. But the Niners are in a position now where they get to reload via the draft. So you would hope that with more picks, whether they're trading up, trading back, that they're in a position to really hit on these picks and accelerate, not to make it a retool versus a rebuild. So it is possible. I do think that that's where I think that it's an underrated thing of what people haven't noticed, if they're not paying that much attention in the draft. But I do think that the Niners, this is a draft that in the positions that they kind of need a little bit more of, this is a really good draft for all of them. So I do think this is a good spot to really just get into the younger market and really just, reset your team that way.
Yeah, exactly. So, Marcos, let's talk a little bit of Philly. They were quiet initially. There were some questions, coming up of are the Eagles going to do anything? What are you doing, Howie? This is your time. This is when you feast. Well, they started making some moves. Marcos, take it away.
So they made a lot of, like kind of how you alluded to for the Niners moves. They made a lot of special teams move, a lot of third team, stringer guys. There's a very good chance that they had signed like the span of 8 dudes in like 2 days. Some notable names: Harrison Bryant from the Raiders, the tight end. We also signed a tight end from Indianapolis. He was their tight end too. We also signed Josh Uche, defensive end. He was playing in Kansas City, but he was getting no time. But he has 1 season in his career where he has 11 sacks. Like, okay, cool, interesting. AJ Dillon, coming off of a terrible neck injury that he suffered that kept him out of all of last year. He comes over, which, he could be kind of the idea of Rashad Penny that we had last year, where he's a big bruising back that if he hits, paired him with Saquon, that'd be a very interesting 1-2 punch. But again, these are kind of just dartboard throws on a lot of, vets. And that's normally what happens for the Eagles had to approach this free agency different. They re-signed Saquon and kept Zach Bond. And that was where their main first wave was going to come from. And they knew that there was going to be just a bunch of, fringe guys that, you're going to take a few chances on. And when you look at some of these moves, a lot of them were tight ends and a lot of them were, you made some moves on the offensive line and you made some moves but I think it's it's prepping for the eventual trade, or it wouldn't make sense to release him. So potential trade of Dallas Goedert, because the Eagles have given permission for him to look at different teams and see what the market is for him out there. Because it would help for us to shed his salary, just kind of like how we shedded Slays and CJ Gardner Johnson. Like, the Eagles are trying to make moves, but there's also free agency move wise. I do think safety might be a position that we either target. There's a couple names. I would say Justin Blackman and Justin Simmons would be, or Julian Blackman and Justin Simmons would be the two names to look out for the free agent safety market for the Eagles. But there was an edge rusher that we signed that actually drew a little bit of attention. And that was the Eagles signing Azeez Ojulari to a 1-year, $4 million deal. For those who don't know, Azeez Ojulari is coming off of his rookie deal, so he's only 24 years old. He played for the New York Giants. He dealt with a little bit of injury trouble these past few years. He played in 11 games, had 6 sacks last year, but he's played 47 games and has had 22 sacks. So he has a very effective production in the games that he's in. And to have him as a rotational piece on this defensive line would potentially be a home run hit if it works out kind of like anything close to what we thought, the Zach Bond thing was going to work out to last year. Azeez is a very smart young player, and he's also a Georgia Bulldog, so he adds to that Georgia Bulldog lineup that we have already. So it is an interesting spot for the Eagles to be in. So that outside of that, he was kind of the only signing that really drew my attention. The other guys are like, okay, let's see if anyone shines in camp, but that's kind of going to be the only way you get major attention. But in terms of the guys who were already on this roster, Brandon Graham has retired. He announced his retirement after 15 seasons. He got his Super Bowl, played out with a torn tricep and retore it. The whole shebang, started drama in the locker room on his way out. Like, BG, he's going to be it's going to be one less mic'd up person we can put on, that could provide some form of nonsense. So, Brandon Graham, a 2-time Super Bowl winner, made the biggest play for the first Super Bowl, and was a big part of this season, so I was really happy for him to go out the way he did. It ended up working out for him. So, in the team. So shout out Brandon Graham, you will be missed. He was definitely a locker room guy, but I can definitely see his influence on some of the guys in the locker room already. So I'm really happy about it. So any final words from Brandon Graham now that you never have to hear from him again?
No, I don't want to talk about him whatsoever, but I do want to talk about Azeez Ojulari, because there was rumors that the Niners should have been in the pot for him, and should have extended an offer. Now he's on the 1-year prove it deal, which is worth the $4 million, like you said, and like you said as well, he's kind of struggled with some injuries in the past. The reason why that contract looks as good as it does, the biggest reason is because he struggles with consistencies and the injuries. And those injuries it's like soft tissue injury, which it's something that's a little bit concerning. So I think a lot of this deal, why you didn't see this deal being extended up until now and it being Philadelphia, is because Philly is able to, kind of take a hit in that area where it's okay. We can take a chance on a guy like this because it's a low risk, high reward style player for our scheme. And, he's not necessarily the Vic Fangio style player. He likes like a more well-rounded player. And he's not, necessarily setting the edge. He's an interesting fit with the defensive style that the Eagles are going for. But I am curious to see, what his fit is like. And I'm curious to see if he's able to make some noise. And 1-year contracts are similar to kind of like rookie deals in a lot of ways, because they're low money and you get the most production out of guys, right? You're getting production out of players who are trying to prove they're worth X amount of money. And this is something I'm going to be watching closely, with Azeez is if he's able to really make some noise, what does it look like next year? I wonder if you guys, offer, something a little bit deeper, maybe a 2-year or a 3-year.
Exactly. And that's the thing, because he's still young enough. So you're taking a dart throw on a player whose best football is potentially ahead of him, especially at the defensive line position. And you saw, I think what makes him interesting is, yes, he is definitely just a pure pass rusher. I think that the Eagles kind of realize their Bryce Huff experiment isn't working and are hoping that this Azeez Ojulari experiment works kind of in the way they had envisioned with Bryce Huff. Without having to pay the money. So it is kind of interesting. The Giants apparently did put an offer on the table for him, but he chose to come to Philly. So the Giants are getting spurned left and right. And it's definitely, we get same thing. We also signed cornerback Adoree Jackson. So we're seeing a few more Giants come on over to spend some time with Saquon. So that's also a little cool nugget that we got there too. But yeah, so Azeez, is a good pickup. I'm excited for him. To see if he can at least stay healthy. If he stays healthy and he can produce and get to the quarterback, it's going to be super impactful, even if it's only, as a part-time guy. And I'm fine with that because you're paying him part-time money. So maybe you can get some good production out of him. But I did have one more piece of news. The Eagles did also extend Lane Johnson. They restructured his deal to where he gets $8 million more up front. So they're rewarding him for all of his hard work. He's extended through his age 37 season. So, he's getting there. We talked about our two offensive linemen, how, they're at the end here. And there's a few positions in the draft, is this the year we draft the, heir apparent to Lane Johnson or find someone to sign? Oh, and we also let go of Mekhi Becton. Mekhi Becton went to the Chargers. He posted a very heartwarming farewell to Philly. Thanked Jeff Stoutland for making him a better player and a better man. And this group of guys, that believed in him coming from New York where, that situation was really bad. The Jets, not the Giants. So, New York is just a toxic, workplace, I guess. But, I'm happy for Mekhi. He gets to make that Chargers team a lot better. I do think, the Chargers made some good moves, for our VTV 13. They're going to be well positioned for next year. So happy for Mekhi. Outside of that, there's not many more Eagles moves. And I don't know what to anticipate, outside of, getting ready for the draft. I don't think we're going to, if we're bringing in a safety, that's going to be great. If you asked me the two between Julian Blackmon or Justin Simmons, I like Simmons, but Julian Blackmon has produced better and he's a much younger player. And if we can sign him for cheap, I'd take that too. So just some names to look out for, but we also might be investing in safety in the draft, defensive linemen. We can kind of go anywhere in this draft. So it's going to be interesting to do prep because they literally at 32, it's an interesting position to be in. You never really know who's going to be available there, or if they do plan on trading up or trading back, what the move's going to be there. So I'm excited to see what happens. But outside of that, just some guys leaving and some interesting ones coming, but we'll see what happens in the next few weeks.
Yes, sir.
All right. So I normally ask you, and we normally don't really do anything outside of this, but we did final thoughts. I was like final thoughts. We're like, not really. But this time I do have a final thought. What's your March Madness bracket looking like nowadays, dude? It's March Madness time. What do you think? What do you think? Who are you feeling? Who are you riding with? If you had, let's pick like two or three teams you're riding with.
I feel good about Duke. And the biggest reason obviously is Cooper Flagg. He's proved to be it's just a really unguardable and a tough guy that can really step up and lead that team. I think without Cooper Flagg, which is a concern that we had, recently when he went down with that twisted ankle, without Cooper Flagg, this Duke team is terrible. So it rides on if Coop is able to stay healthy and if he's consistent throughout this tournament. I think Duke will find themselves in the Final Four. Outside of that, it's tough, man. It's a toss up. I do like that Kentucky team a lot, and I normally like to ride with Kentucky.
Yeah, you do.
I think they're third or fourth right now going into the tourney. And recently they've been playing some good ball. So I like their bracket. I think they've got a chance to go pretty deep. So I'm going to be riding with them too.
I like that. Okay. Obviously, Arizona, it's that time of year. Got to support them. I'm very nervous about their, positioning in the bracket. It's hard to believe, they made it to the finals of the Big 12 tournament. They had a couple good wins in there, but, ultimately couldn't beat Houston. And Houston's going to be a name to look out for too. They're always a tough out in the tournament.
Yeah.
This year, I'm looking at St. John's, and I'm really liking what I see over there. I think Rick Pitino has done a good job, kind of really transforming that program. They've beaten the crap out of UConn, making they really surprised this year. They do have a tough bracket. I think they're in Florida's bracket, and Florida has been a very they have kind of that that roster that has two of everything. They have a really deep team. So in this kind of in March Madness, that can help at any time, having a team where you can turn to anybody, and they have one of the best guards in the country too. So I'm going to be obviously rooting for Arizona, but if they're looking at one of those upsets, they could potentially be upset by Akron because Akron's a high scoring team. So I'm a little nervous to see what happens there. But yeah, I think St. John's is kind of the team I'm gonna pay attention to during this run. I like the way they look.
Do you believe in Florida?
Yes and no. I'm gonna ride with St. John's, so ultimately I think Florida is gonna lose. But Florida, I think that conference that they're in, with Auburn and them two going back and forth. There were some good games, but they're so weird because like the losses they've had have been really bad, but they also have had like good wins too. So I don't know how much I believe in Florida. I think the national media really believes in Florida, but I don't know how I feel about them.
Yeah, that's fair. One other team that I'll kind of be keeping my eye on is Tennessee. Tennessee's been having a hell of a year. The Tennessee Volunteers. They're 27-7. They're going in as the second seed, and they I've been keeping up, number one, because one of my coworkers is a big Tennessee guy, and he's been keeping up and kind of keeping tabs on them. So he's been filling me in with them. And obviously they had a tough loss against Florida recently that wasn't it wasn't the hottest of games for them, but I do think they'll go deep. I think they've got a good shot at things. And, also shout out to my parents who live out there in Tennessee too. So if Tennessee finds their way deep in the bracket here and deep in the conversations, I might start riding with Tennessee.
Hey, I love that. That's awesome. No, so that's great. We'll maybe next year we'll plan on doing like an official bracket and like going crazy because our situation will be a little easier to do so, I think. So it'll be a lot of fun to really invest in the kind of March Madness of it all. But definitely over the past few weeks, I've been paying a little more attention. So I'm excited to see what happens, as is the craziest time of year that is March. So,
yes, sir.
All right. With that being said, we'll cut the episode off here. This was episode 81 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. For all you video watchers out there, all of our social media links are up above. For all you audio listeners out there, the links to the description are down below. Please give us a like, subscribe, rate, review, follow, comment, let us know how bad the Kings are. Let us know what Niners fans think about the offseason changes. Are you sad Jordan Mason's gone? Are you excited to pay Brock Purdy? How much do you think he's worth? For you Eagles fans, are you guys feeling comfortable? Because I am, that's for sure. So you guys can hit us up at any time. We appreciate all your love and support. We're growing with you each and every week. But I'm Marcos Conan-Negron. Beside me here, as always, is
Ben the Jet Rets, and also let us know your March Madness brackets. Let us know who you got going all the way, because I'm curious to see.
Yes, please comment down below who you guys have going all the way. With that being said, guys, we will talk to you next week.
Peace.